KPBS On Demand is supported by the San Diego County Toyota dealers, offering a new 2025 lineup of vehicles at your local Toyota dealer, including a new Tacoma with turbocharged 4-cylinder engines and a hybrid powertrain option. The San Diego County Toyota dealers. We make it easy.
Welcome to another edition of listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. And although I don't sound like it, I'm Beth Accomando. Forgive the delay in the podcast and for the raspy voice, but I can't think of a better film with which to celebrate Black History Month this year than the documentary I Am Not Your Negro. The film is based on the writings of James Baldwin, and it just received an Oscar nomination for Best Documentary. I'll be speaking with director Raoul Peck about his 10-year struggle to bring the film to fruition. Here's part of the trailer.
If any white man in the world says, "Give me liberty or give me death," the entire white world applauds. When a black man says exactly the same thing, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example of this bad nigger so there won't be any more like him.
The story of the Negro in America is the story of America. It is not a pretty story.
Most of the white Americans I've ever encountered, sure, they have nothing whatever against Negroes. That's really not the question. Really a kind of apathy and ignorance. You don't know what's happening on the other side of the wall because you don't want to know.
In America, I was free only in battle, never free to rest.
We need to take action, any kind of action, by any means necessary.
They needed us to pick the cotton, and now they don't need us anymore. Now they don't need us, they're going to kill us all off.
We're at a time in American history when people who speak the truth seem to have a harder time being heard, and when racial divisions have become intensified. So a documentary about James Baldwin right now is especially compelling because he pointed out painful truths about race in America more than half a century ago. Truths that went mostly ignored then, but resonate today with a newfound passion and urgency. Some reviews of the film have called Baldwin's words prophetic, but that's not entirely accurate. They were simply Baldwin's assessment of racial issues as he experienced them, and they sound prophetic now only because they weren't heeded at the time. He was an incisive observer, and it's troubling that many of the things he was critical of 50 years ago still exist today. That's not prophetic, that's infuriating. But the voice of a thoughtful, introspective, and thoroughly uncompromising Black poet who engaged in lengthy debates in academic halls as well as on mainstream television may still go ignored at a time of 30-second sound bites and 140-character tweets. Although, if he were alive today, he probably could have mastered those. Raoul Peck's documentary uses Baldwin's own words, delivered by the author himself in archival footage, and brought to new life through Samuel L. Jackson's measured vocal performance. The writings are mainly from an unfinished book Baldwin had planned on the 3 slain civil rights leaders, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr.
The 3 men, Medgar, Malcolm, and Martin, were very different men. Consider that Martin was only 26 in 1955. He took on his shoulders the weight of the crimes and the lies and the hope of a nation. I want these 3 lives to bang against and reveal each other, as in truth they did, and use their dreadful journey as a means of instructing the people whom they loved so much, who betrayed them, and for whom they gave their lives.
When I was a teenager, Baldwin's writings initially confused and challenged me. I had grown up in what I considered a liberal home. My grandmother was French and had taught the children of Malcolm X and always cited them among the brightest she'd ever had. My grandfather was Chinese, but worked in the UN as a French diplomat, helping to found UNICEF and also working in underdeveloped African countries. I grew up with people of all colors, various races, and many languages coming through the house and thinking nothing of it. My parents encouraged diversity in the music they played, the books they read, and the movies they saw. I remember them talking about the civil rights movement and what people like the Kennedys were doing, and offering high praise for African Americans like Martin Luther King, Barbara Jordan, and Shirley Chisholm. But when I first read and heard Baldwin, he challenged me to rethink how I looked at race, because my perspective had only been from a white point of view.
Most of the white Americans I've ever encountered, really, had a Negro friend or a Negro maid or somebody in high school, but they never, or rarely, after school was over or whatever, came to my kitchen. We were segregated from the schoolhouse door. Therefore, he doesn't know. He really does not know what it was like for me to leave my house, leave the school and go back to Harlem. He doesn't know how Negroes live. And it comes as a great surprise to the Kennedy brothers and to everybody else in the country. I'm certain, again, that like most white Americans I have, encountered, they have I'm sure they have nothing whatever against Negroes. That's really not the question. The question is really a kind of apathy and ignorance, which is a price to be paid for segregation. That's what segregation means. You don't know what's happening on the other side of the wall because you don't want to know.
At a Cambridge debate in 1965, Baldwin reacted to Robert Kennedy's comment about blacks making progress, and maybe in 40 years there could be a black president.
And that sounded like a very emancipated statement, I suppose, to white people. They were not in Harlem when this statement was first heard, and did not hear, and possibly will never hear, the laughter and the bitterness and the scorn with which the statement was greeted. From the point of view of the man in the Harlem barbershop, Bobby Kennedy only got here yesterday. And now he's already on his way to the presidency. We've been here for 400 years, and now he tells us that maybe in 40 years, if you're good, we may let you become president.
So while I might have looked at Kennedy's statement as a positive one about race in America, Baldwin was forcing me to consider it from his black point of view and seeing something different. It wasn't about white guilt or placing blame, but rather about seeing the difference between something whites thought they were giving to blacks versus something that blacks had earned and deserved on their own. Similarly, I look to films like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and The Defiant Ones as positive films encouraging tolerance. But Baldwin saw Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, about an interracial marriage, as a film that used actor Sidney Poitier against his own black community. And in the earlier film, The Defiant Ones, Poitier played a black convict who escapes from prison chained to a white prisoner played by Tony Curtis.
Look, man, don't give me that look. You should have got what was coming to you. After spitting in that guy's face.
It is impossible to accept the premise of the story. A premise based on the profound American misunderstanding of the nature of the hatred between black and white.
That time is now.
The root of the black man's hatred is rage. And he does not so much hate white men as simply wants them out of his way. And more than that, out of his children's way. The root of the white man's hatred is terror. A bottomless and nameless terror, which focuses on this dread figure, an entity which lives only in his mind. When Sidney jumps off the train, the white liberal people downtown were much relieved and joyful. But when black people saw him jump off the train, they yelled, "Get back on the train, you fool." The black man jumps off the train in order to reassure white people, to make them know that they are not hated, that though they have made human errors, they've done nothing for which to be hated.
Again, this was Baldwin asking me to look below the surface of this piece of pop entertainment and look beyond what I as a white person saw as a well-intentioned effort at racial understanding, and instead to interpret it against a more complex dynamic. Peck, who was born in Haiti and raised in France, wants us to revisit Baldwin's words in all their complexity and passion, and to evaluate them from the perspective of 2017, looking back on all that has happened in more than half a century since Baldwin published his first book. Baldwin fiercely presented his point of view in an attempt to make the white majority see race relations from a different perspective, to not see it as merely a black problem, and to not separate black history from American history. And it wasn't about placing blame, but rather about accepting shared responsibility. Here he speaks on The Dick Cavett Show I can't imagine such a ferocious, eloquent, or extended commentary happening on a talk show today outside of maybe Charlie Rose.
I left this country for one reason only, one reason. I didn't care where I went. I might have gone to Hong Kong, I might have gone to Timbuktu. I ended up in Paris, on the streets of Paris, with $40 in my pocket on the theory that nothing worse could happen to me there than it already happened to me here. You talk about making it as a writer by yourself. You have to be able then to turn off all the antenna with which you live, because once you turn your back on this society, you may die. You may die. And it's very hard to sit at a typewriter and concentrate on that if you're afraid of the world around you. The years I lived in Paris did one thing for me. They released me from that particular social terror, which was not the paranoia of my own mind, but a real social danger visible in the face of every cop, every boss, everybody. I don't know what most white people in this country feel, but I can only include what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, that the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That says a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks I give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
Peck does not include any contemporary commentary in terms of having scholars or critics evaluate what Baldwin said. He gives us only Baldwin in his own words. But Peck does add commentary in the way he cuts contemporary images to those words. So as Baldwin laments the deaths of innocent blacks in the 1960s, Peck cuts to images of recent deaths of young blacks who committed no crimes, yet died at the hands of law enforcement.
I know how you watch as you grow older. And this is not a figure of speech. The corpses of your brothers and your sisters pile up around you, and not for anything they have done. They were too young to have done anything. But what one does realize is that when you try to stand up and look the world in the face like you had a right to be here, you have attacked the entire power structure of the Western world.
I began my interview with Raoul Peck by asking how this project, based on James Baldwin's writings, got started.
Well, this is the kind of thing you just don't decide to do. It was your urge to do. And I met Baldwin's work very early on in my life, after, school and beginning of college. And he changed my life. He changed my way of thinking. He helped me focus on what was essential and not, and he gave me a structure to lean on, to analyze the world I was living in. And at that age, I was already traveling in many different countries, many different situations, and including the United States. And really, he was a very important person and mentor all my life. So 10 years ago, when I decided that it was about time to come back to Baldwin, not particularly for me, but for this present generation, where I felt the voice of Baldwin is so necessary and missing. We've lost most of our important leaders. There is, imagine those three men, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King. They were killed before they were 40. And this is exactly the voices that we are missing. The civil rights movement was put in a sort of institutionalized path. And once we built those monuments, once we created Black History Month, it's somehow a way to bring part of the movement to a stop, because the choice was to retain the absurdity of a Martin Luther King who was a peaceful person, the peaceful pastor, and Malcolm X, who was the racist torch. And we forget that those two men became not only friends, but they had the same political position toward the end of their lives. When you read, or listen to Martin Luther King's speeches his last 2 years, they were radical and revolutionary. And that aspect of Martin Luther King disappeared. So we forgot how incredible leaders they were and how they saw through the haze and confusion of not only racism, but of the class relationship in this country, and how important it is. It was never about just being black. It was also about being poor, and being poor as a black person, a Latino, or a white person. They succeeded in dividing us. And that explains a lot about the current situation in this country. There are separation and division where there shouldn't have been, but solidarity and allies. And it's not the case because there is a total ideological confusion.
So at what point did you start making this film? Because it does come out at a time when, despite the fact that a lot of the material is older in terms of when these people wrote and when these people, were living, it feels very resonant for today. So how long was this in the process?
Well, that's exactly what I felt 10 years ago. I felt, coming back to Baldwin, my God, he's writing about today. And this was before the election of Obama. It's about what have we kept from this whole civil rights movement? What have really changed since then? What are the structural change and what are the just cosmetic change? And I think we got away all these years with those cosmetic things. It's not that, police brutality, to take just that one aspect, had ceased when we decided that there was going to be Black History Month. In the film, there is a moment where Medgar Evers is holding a shield, and on it's written, "Stop Police Brutality." That was 60 years ago. And you have a picture of Malcolm X holding a newspaper, and the front page says, 7 young black kids killed by the police. And you have the same with Martin Luther King. So this is not new. The only thing which is new is that we are seeing it on videos. So this means something about what really happened the last 40, 50 years. When Dick Cavett is asking James Baldwin,
Mr. Baldwin, I'm sure you still meet the remark that, what are the Negroes, why aren't they optimistic? They say, but it's getting so much better. There are Negro mayors. There's Negroes in all of sports. There are Negroes in politics. They're even accorded the ultimate accolade of being in television commercials now. And, I'm glad you're smiling. Is it at once getting much better and still hopeless?
The second question should be, what did really change deep down? Do we don't have any ghettos anymore? Do we have better schools everywhere? Do we have black family where there is a father, a mother, and children? Do we have family without at least 2, 3, 4 of them in prisons, generations? So all these questions are the fundamental question which Baldwin addressed very early on. And when I felt that we were in this hole thinking that, we are in a better world when we were just going deeper into that crazy ambience. And even the 8 years of Obama, yes, they were important. And yes, they made, I think, a difference, but not to a point where it would have made an important and structural change in this country. And just to finish that response, Baldwin had a response to a journalist about this very question. He said, the most important thing is not who will be the first Negro president. The most important question is what country he's going to be the president of. That's the real question. And as long as the country itself don't change, nothing will change. And that's where Baldwin puts you, confronts you with this reality and tells you, you are part of the problem. And it's specifically the white majority of this country.
What your role is in this country and what your future is in it. Mm-hmm. How precisely you're going to reconcile yourself to your situation here, and how you're going to communicate to the vast, heedless, unthinking, cruel white majority that you are here. I'm terrified at the moral apathy, the death of the heart, which is happening in my country. These people have deluded themselves for so long that they really don't think I'm human. I base this on their conduct, not on what they say. And this means that they have become, in themselves, moral monsters.
No, you can't just hide and think that it's a black problem. It's the problem of the black population. Baldwin's answer to that is, I didn't invent slavery. I didn't invent Jim Crow. I did not invent racism. How come I am the one to have to deal with it? Come back, and I am not your nigger, as he says. Come back and take your nigger, because it's not my problem anymore.
I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. To be a pessimist means that you have agreed that human life is an academic matter. So I'm forced to be an optimist. I'm forced to believe that we can survive whatever we must survive. But the Negro in this country, the future of the Negro in this country is precisely as bright or as dark as the future of the country. It is entirely up to the American people and our representatives. It is entirely up to the American people whether or not they're going to face and deal with and embrace this stranger whom they maligned so long. What white people have to do is try to find out in their own hearts why it was necessary to have a nigger in the first place. Because I'm not a nigger. I'm a man. But if you think I'm a nigger, it means you need him. The question you've got to ask yourself, the white population of this country has got to ask itself, North and South, because it's one country, and for a Negro, there is no difference in the North and the South. There's just a difference in the way they castrate you. But the fact of the castration is the American fact. If I'm not the nigger here, and you invented him, you, the white people, invented him, then you got to find out why. And the future of the country depends on that, whether or not it's able to ask that question.
And if you want us to deal together with it, I will do this. But take your part of this burden. Don't lay it on me, because I am a man. I don't know what you're dealing with in constructing that image, which is not me, And so that confrontation is real, and that's what the film is about.
I really like the way you put the film together, because you basically only use his words and archival footage. You don't have any contemporary person being interviewed or commentating on it. How did you decide on the way to actually put this film together and to make it?
Well, it was from the beginning, it was always my ambition to make sure that there is a direct confrontation between Baldwin's words and the audience. I didn't want anybody in between. I didn't want any scholar or any interpreter, trying to tell what Baldwin is saying or what he means, because his words are clear enough. He's one of the rare, author that could, address himself to any scholar and any intellectual at the same time to be perfectly clear for a normal audience or the man or the woman in the streets. And so my job was to bring those words directly in all their rawness to the audience. So it means to make this film in a very particular way, not to have any talking heads, and to make sure that at every second of this film, you are totally with Baldwin. You are identifying yourself with him. He's the one telling you the story, and he's doing that in a very intimate way, looking at you and looking at the camera. And this was the whole approach of the film, in the choice of the images, of the archive, in the part of the film that we shot, and the photos, and as well the voice, and the music. It's a totally a perfect Baldwin ambience. We choose most of the music that he either talked about or that we knew that he loved or that he used at certain point in his writing. So it was really a sort of reconstruction of the perfectly James Baldwin work, and make sure that his words will stay forever, and that we would go back to his writing and make sure that we use it the proper way.
Well, I thought it was a very powerful choice to do it that way, because the fact that he did write a lot of this stuff decades ago and how relevant it still is really points to the fact how little has changed on some things.
And how fundamental his thinking was, and how he got to the core of what this country is. That's how you become a classic, because you can make the difference between what is relevant and what is just cosmetic and superficial. And that's why his analysis is not only, he's not only telling us what is the history of this country, but he's giving us as well the instrument to continue that analysis and eventually to change this reality to a better one.
There is a lot of archive material in the film. How difficult was it to find interviews with him and find them in a condition that you could put into a film?
The problem was not to find, because there was a lot. It was to find them in a good quality, to have access to the rights, because as you can imagine, we had to either buy them or find them or negotiate them. So it was an incredible work for our archivist team, and also to make the right choice, because ultimately it was not just to put those archives back to back. It had to make sense. It had to be a story, and it had to be a story that the one that we wanted to tell. So it took us a lot of editing and a lot of research, a lot of discussion and finding the money, etc., to make sure that the film would be the way it is and made with all the freedom I could have. I don't think I could have been able to make this film in a more constrained structure. I don't think if I did not produce it myself, it would have been very difficult, because I would have constantly that pressure of somebody telling me, Raoul, where's the film? And I created an environment and also a structure that allowed me to, I could work on it with part of my team, or my editor would continue to work on it while I was making another film and come back to it, or my editor would go and edit another film, so that each time we would come back and work on it, we would have a certain distance. And that distance would allow us to separate what was important and what was needed for this story and what was not that interesting. So layers after layers, the film became what it was, and we took the time to make sure that we would stop until we are really satisfied, and we felt that every single frame of this film is accurate, it's impactful, strong, poetic, and a great narrative.
You have Samuel Jackson reading sections of Baldwin's work. Why did you choose him and have that work? Because he did a great job, and he didn't do any of his kind of like... It took me a while to recognize that voice.
Well, that was the idea. And when you say reading, is not reading. That's the thing. If he was reading, or, that's sometimes people say, well, he's the narrator or a voiceover. No, if we had done that, it would have been a failure. The only way this thing would work is that if we succeed in creating a character, because you see Baldwin in the film, you see him talking, you hear his real voice, and then you hear that voice as well. And you had to install an ambience so that it wouldn't matter, going from one voice to the other, because those two voices are the same person, because they have the same soul. So the approach, and that Sam got very quickly, as the great actor he is that you could not leave any distance between the text and the voice. The voice had to be the person. Everything has to be felt. You have to be in the emotion of the text. You have to, render the text and everything that is in the text. If you had just read it, or if you had put any distance, it would not have worked. So it's really a performance. It's Sam Jackson creating a character. So that character is always through as long as you stay in character, and that's what he did in throughout the film.
That's when I saw the photograph. On every newspaper kiosk on that wide tree-shaped boulevard in Paris were photographs of 15-year-old Dorothy Counts being reviled and spat upon by the mob as she was making her way to school in Charlotte, North Carolina. There was unutterable pride, tension, and anguish in that girl's face as she approached the halls of learning with history jeering at her back. It made me furious. It filled me with both hatred and pity, and it made me ashamed. Some one of us should have been there with her.
So it's not about Sam Jackson. It's not about whatever he's known for or whatever people think that he is. What I wanted is not only a great actor, but somebody also as a human being who has a stand, who has some sort of street credibility and respect. Because no matter what people sometimes say about his choices of film, but he has a real life as well. He has a past. And I think he felt, these words say something to him. He come from the South. He knows those words, what those words means in his life or the life of his parents, of his family. So this is what I wanted from him, and he just did it splendidly.
Yes, it worked very well in the film. It was a very powerful film, and I appreciate what you put into it. How do you feel about receiving the Oscar nomination this year?
Well, of course, as can you imagine, my team, myself, we are, very happy about it. It's a great thing, but most of it because, I'm an older filmmaker, so it's not that I'm starting my career. I've done all the film I wanted to make, and it's more I'm happy that we will manage and we will succeed in putting James Baldwin words on the front line again. This is what I see through this whole thing happening to us and to the film. It's about, how do we bring a real conversation in this country? And how do we really face the reality and stop playing games around? And now we're going to have 4 years in front of us where we are going again to play games. And while people are still dying, while the power structure is still wreaking havoc throughout the world, instead of really facing our reality, our history, and Baldwin's words are very hard on us. Watching the film is for me an experience and a very emotional one. That's what I get from people telling me after they watch it, because it can't leave you cold, because it's addressing to you in a very personal, even intimate way. You need to give a response to the questions that are asked in the film. And I do hope that this whole Academy Award nomination, if it gives a lot of exposure to James Baldwin, if it bring Baldwin again center stage and to the right place where he had, that's the greatest awards that we can get.
Well, it just seems, coming after last year's Oscar So White, that it does have the ability with this nomination to put the focus on a film like this and to maybe get you a little more attention than it might have under different circumstances.
Yes, for sure. But at the same time, we should be careful that, all these films that are celebrated today, those are, mostly, films that were initiated and fought for by black and minority filmmakers. It's just by chance that we have such a great film this year. Those are, stories of real hardship for some of them. And it's not because we finally made it to this year. I worked 10 years on this film, and some of my colleagues less eventually, but nothing have structurally changed. Oscar So White is not about what the Academy does or not, or the structure of voters. There is only so much you can do, and those changes were great and necessary, but the big question is, how do you produce them? How do you create? How do you change the power structure that decided what film is going to be made? For me, as a black filmmaker, the situation is exactly the same, because tomorrow I will have to face a studio head and spend eventually 2/3 of my time with him in my meeting, explaining him like who's James Baldwin, or who's some other black historical, or who is Dubois, who is Langston Hughes. Why is it important to do a film on those characters? So as long as you have to do that, and somebody else have the key to the film you want to make, and it's usually somebody who is not your culture, who is not your race, who is not your gender, and who doesn't have your history, and who's deciding for you. And as long as the power structure itself will not change, and I don't think it will change by itself, because there is not such a thing about willingly giving piece of your power to anybody. So as well as the civil rights movement was important to gain certain progress in this country, it will be the same with Hollywood. It's not about getting some piece of the pie every year. And by the way, those are pieces of pie that we had to fight for. Nothing is given for granted, it's taken for granted. So for me, as far as I'm concerned, and I hope most of my colleagues as well, it's about continuing that fight, because we are far from an acceptable situation.
And do you feel that films do have the power to affect change?
No, I don't think a film can be part of change. I don't think suddenly, a whole group of people will watch a film and the world will be upside down. But I think film can catch a certain moment in the life of a people or a country. We know the film of Vajda in Poland, when they came during the Polish Union resistance, were very important and were embraced by the movement and did help for the change, and also called attention to the rest of the world. And I do think film can do that. And film can, of course, change you and as an individual. Certain film changed my life, and like other films changed the life of some other individual. I met people who say the film is changing their life, But in order to become, a collective thing, it will take more time, and the film can participate in that, of course, and I hope so too. And I hope also that Baldwin books and Baldwin work will help also this younger generation to focus on what is important and what is less important, that it will help us to find a way throughout our anger that is legitimate toward organizing a movement, toward finding ways to go for the long fight, not just the moment where you react. Because that's what the civil rights movement was. That's the great lesson that Baldwin tells us. It was about organizing, but on the long term, and it was about taking risk. Those young men and young women at the time, whether they were white or black, when they went to the South, they were risking their lives. And a lot of them were killed, and killed in a very brutal way. So when you're watching today, you must ask yourself, my God, what are we risking, basically? Are we just risking our jobs? And that includes also journalism, the way the press is working. What is their risk beside losing their job? You lose your job, so what? People were risking their lives. Mm-hmm. So it's really a moment in our history where we really need those questions asked,
Mm-hmm.
And we got lazy. We got, the whole environment got so, full of stuff that are not important. It's like a big cloud around our head, and with Twitter and Facebook and all those, instruments that are there to take away our attention and to stuff that are totally superficial. And now it's this thing is even all the way to the top of this nation. We have a very tough 4 years in front of us.
Mm-hmm. And one last thing, you mentioned films have changed you. Can you mention one film that you felt did change who you were?
I knew you were going to ask that.
Just curious.
Many films, sometimes it's part inside a film that changed my life. Somebody like Chris Marker changed my life. A film like Sans Soleil, although I was already a young adult when I saw it. But on the top of my head, that's one of the films I can say had a great influence in my life. But books, people like, Baldwin, Frantz Fanon, Aimé Césaire, Alejo Carpentier, those were important books that really made who I am today, because they really changed my life.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate your film.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another edition of listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. I Am Not Your Negro opened nationally on February 3rd and opens in San Diego on February 10th at Landmark's Hillcrest Cinemas. You can watch the Academy Awards on February 26th to see if it wins the Best Documentary Award. In the meantime, go see this film and either discover Baldwin for the first time or reacquaint yourself with his words. And be listening this weekend for my podcast all about John Wick 2 and how it elevates American action films to a whole new level. I speak with stuntman turned director Chad Stahelski about his gun fu style that mixes Hong Kong shooting techniques with his own brand of American action, and how Gene Kelly and Buster Keaton were also influences. I will also be a guest once again on the projection booth, this time talking about Making Mr. Right. So till our next Film Fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident cinema junkie.
KPBS On Demand is supported by the San Diego County Toyota dealers, presenting a new 2025 Tundra designed to combine performance and comfort with up to 437 horsepower and 10-speed automatic transmission. See your Toyota dealer. The San Diego County Toyota dealers. We make it easy.